Hello there, little masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we finally see the violence inherent in the system.
Help, help, I'm being repressed. West Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Azog to my Bolg, Alan Sisto.
Bolg, I am your father. And
folks, that one wasn't really very flattering to either one of us.
No, it really isn't. No, but that's okay. If you're going to insult me, at least you insulted yourself. I'm fine.
Exactly. I'm an equal opportunity insulter.
There you go. Folks, we really are going to see some violence tonight as the clouds burst in Chapter 17. After all his adventures, the sneaking and the stealing, skirmishes with goblins and spiders, contests of wits with dragons and golems, Mr. Baggins of Bag End Under Hill is going to get his first taste of real battle.
And not surprisingly, he's going to find it very uncomfortable and wish he was nowhere near it. But I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yes, you are, because first it's time for another Tolkien Quote of the Day.
All right. Well, I've chosen a really special one for tonight, folks, and I hope you enjoy it. In 1968, Professor Tolkien gave an interview to Keith Brace, the literary editor of the Birmingham Post. The article was published on May 25th, 1968, which is 50 years ago this past Friday, actually, if you're listening to the episode when it releases. And it covered the topics you would expect at this late point in Tolkien's life. It covered his childhood in Birmingham, of course, because it was the Birmingham Post.
The local paper, right.
Yeah, it covered the popularity of Lord of the Rings. It covered World War I. And that's what brings me to the quote of the day, which I think is very fitting for today's episode. Tolkien said, "The war made me poignantly aware of the beauty of the world. I remember miles and miles of seething, tortured earth, perhaps best described in the chapter about the approaches to Mordor. It was a searing experience."
Oh, wow.
Now, as always, Tolkien has got a beautiful way with words. But I chose that quote today because, as you said in the intro, Bilbo's finally going to see real war. And as we've talked so much about sort of the conflict, the push and pull between his Tookish nature and his Bagginsy nature, the comforts he misses, I have to think that Bilbo would be having the exact same reaction that young Tolkien did to his first taste of war. I think the ugliness of war will make him aware of the beauty of the world. The horror and the discomfort that he experiences are going to give definition to the comforts of home that he's missing. And that I think he'll basically spend the rest of his life celebrating in his poetry and his memoirs and otherwise.
Yeah, that's a good point. That sort of contrast, that searing experience, that's a powerful phrase that he used there.
It is, yeah.
And, and how it contrasts with the beauty of the world. That contrast is something that Tolkien weaves masterfully throughout the whole legendarium, really.
Yeah.
We've talked at great length about themes that are contrasting as well: hope and despair, fate and free will, comfort and discomfort. Several other contrasting pairs, usually as they involve individuals, though. This contrast is more on that macro scale. And so it's a little easier to miss, I think, but it really is no less powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And, and as you say that, I'm reminded of some of the stuff in Verlin Flieger's Splintered Light, where she talks about the play of contrasts and that, and how much the contrasts define and accentuate each other. Yeah. And I think you're right. This is a sort of a macro scale contrast, and so it's not as obvious because it doesn't happen within a particular character. But you're right. We do see this throughout. I mean, as we're about to dive into Lord of the Rings, I know we're going to see this with Sam. We'll see this with Merry and Pippin, especially with the passage from Flotsam and Jetsam that I just read for Tolkien Reading Day. So
I think you're right.
It's a cool quote and just a neat thing to keep in mind here.
It really is. Well, with that, I think it's time to go ahead and get on with the discussion.
All right.
We are going to start at the very beginning. Whether it's a good place to start or not, I'll leave that up to you.
It's not a very good place to start today, but
Yeah, not if you want to avoid battle. That's true.
No.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pick up here. Next day, the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon, a single runner was seen hurrying along the narrow path. At a distance, he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come to hand and matters were changed. "That will be Dain," said Thorin when he heard. "They will have got wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in number and weaponless, and I will hear," he called to the messenger. About midday, the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching. At the beginning of the narrow way, they laid aside sword and spear and came on towards the gate. Wondering, the dwarves saw that among them were both Bard and the Elven King. before whom an old man, wrapped in cloak and hood, bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. "Hail, Thorin," said Bard. "Are you still of the same mind?" "My mind has not changed with the rising and setting of a few suns," answered Thorin. "Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till then you come in vain to bargain with me. Is there then nothing for which you would yield any of your gold? Nothing that you or your friends have to offer." "What of the Arkenstone of Thrain?" said he, and at the same moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Then Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke for a long while. Thorin at length broke the silence, and his voice was thick with wrath. "That stone was my father's and is mine," he said. "Why should I purchase my own?" But wonder overcame him, and he added, "But how came you by the heirloom of my house, if there is need to ask such a question of thieves?" "We are not thieves," Bard answered. "Your own we will give back in return for our own." "How came you by it?" shouted Thorin in gathering rage. "I gave it to them," squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall, by now in a dreadful fright.
Oh, Bilbo.
"I gave it to them," squeaked Bilbo, as his pants were suddenly and mysteriously quite wet. I mean, really, goodness.
Yeah. I mean, Thorin is just beyond mad.
Yeah,
rage.
yeah.
Gathering
The
rage.
rage.
It's a very descriptive term.
Yeah, it really is. There's a lot here.
Of course.
You kind of think, oh, well, this is just a fairly self-explanatory passage, but there's so much to discuss. We all know, because we've read the chapter, so spoiler alert for a few minutes from now, that's Gandalf that opens up the casket, I love this.
Surprise.
We've got Bard, Thranduil, and the unrevealed Gandalf, and that he's carrying the Arkenstone, not Bard.
Yeah. Interesting. Kind of giving him the place of respect there, allowing him to carry the...
And of neutrality, really, because he's not a party to this conflict
yet. Yeah.
He doesn't have an interest in this, other than hopefully seeing peace come from it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I love the setup, though. I love Bard's. Is there nothing that you would no nothing? Are you sure?
And you see Thorin's overmode here. He is so overconfident here. It's like, I've got nothing to say to you people. Yeah.
I mean,
my mind doesn't change with the rising and setting of a few suns. He thinks he's holding all the cards here.
He does. Yeah, he's if he's playing a hand of poker, he's looking at like a pair of deuces, and he thinks he's got a lot.
Yeah.
And
he's got a decent hand. He's got all that money, and all those people out there need it. But
he doesn't have any food, though. I just keep reminding him of that.
He's got a couple of pairs, maybe three of a kind. He doesn't have a full house or royal flush or anything.
I guess he's probably playing 7-card, and he's waiting for the whatever those. I know their names for each of the cards: the river, the whatever.
The turn,
I don't remember which one's which. Yeah. But he's expecting that last card to give him a flush, maybe, because he knows Dain's coming.
Yeah, right.
But I love this description of the light of the Arkenstone, though. The light
that is so cool.
Leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. So here we are in broad daylight, and the Arkenstone is so bright, illuminating.
That it shines white in the morning. Yeah,
amazing.
It really is giving off its own light here.
Yeah, it's
giving off and reflecting. It's reflecting very brilliantly.
Yeah, because if it was that bright when it was in the dragon's cave, it wouldn't have been that little bit of gleam that they saw off in the distance. It would have been the big old bright spotlight.
Right.
But it's certainly reflecting all that light in a way that just must have been stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, I go back and forth with the Arkenstone. I can't decide if it's giving off its own light or if it's purely reflecting. I think there is.
I think it does give off some of its own.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's giving off enough of its own.
Enough
to be that bright.
Enough to I see what you're saying.
Because when we saw it in the cave,
there was something in there about it giving off its own light.
Yeah, there was some gleam.
Yeah.
But it was faint, and you couldn't really. It's not like you could read the paper by it,
Right.
Whereas this is obviously brighter than sunlight.
Right. Amazing, though. Yeah.
Pretty amazing stuff. Thorin's just absolutely jaw
speechless.
On the floor.
Yeah. Understandably. Yeah.
And you can just imagine what the other dwarves are thinking. Oh,
He's like, oh,
this is
oh
not
no.
good.
That's, yeah. This is not going to end well.
This is not going to end well. And that's true.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
No, we're not.
Why is Thorin turning green? I don't understand.
and his armor is ripping. What's going on?
Richard Armitage has been replaced by Lou Ferrigno all of a sudden.
Oh goodness! I wonder if any of the people who watch Incredible Hulk now even remember Lou Ferrigno. That was such a throwback.
I don't know. I met Lou Ferrigno when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That was fun. He was probably the first celebrity I met.
There you go.
Nowadays, it's all Mark Ruffalo.
It is.
I like Mark Ruffalo, but
Yeah, I do too.
but I met Lou Ferrigno. I didn't meet Mark
There you go.
Ruffalo.
I didn't mean Mark Ruffalo.
But we digress.
We certainly do. I like kind of the irony behind the line of why should I purchase my own, when the reality is he's asking Bard to pretty much do exactly that. He's not going to let him have Girion's treasure unless he comes and offers something. And yet that treasure belongs to Bard legally.
It is very ironic.
Yeah.
It's the short-sightedness of,
It is.
He's
Total
able to see his own position so very well, but he can't.
It's that lack of empathy again. We talked about
exactly.
that before, and
Yeah.
kind of like Feanor with the Teleri and the ships that were like their Silmarils in the sense that they were never going to be able to make them again.
Yeah.
I love how he asks how they acquire it, and then he just accuses them of being thieves anyway. Like, how'd you get that? By stealing it, really.
Right.
What he
Yeah.
pretty much
If
just
there's a
says. He
need to
answers
ask
the
that
question.
of thieves, yeah. But then Bilbo, I love this moment where Bilbo
I know.
confesses. He,
Such courage.
as terrified as he is, and he is terrified. He,
Squeaks Bilbo.
he squeaks it. But and I loved your squeak, by the way. That was well done. But
Thank you.
But he still speaks up, and there's a courage there, and there's integrity there, as we discussed in the last episode.
Yeah, absolutely. A willingness to face the responsibility for his decision. Yeah.
He's a burglar, but he's an honest burglar, and
Yes.
it's like, well, I'm found out now, so I'm going to go ahead and admit what I did.
Yeah,
It's the right thing to do.
that's exactly right. Now, I think he knows, okay, well, that's Gandalf, so maybe Gandalf will help me here. I mean, there's probably a little bit of that, like, well, I'm
Make
hoping
sure the wizard's in range for a quick fireball before.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I don't know, can he cast a net in midair? And,
Right, yeah.
Because we're not going to read that part, but, Thorin grabs him.
Oh, man,
And-
yeah.
And, I mean, literally at this point, if Gandalf doesn't intervene, Thorin's going to kill him. He's going to throw him over the wall.
Yeah.
And I think the most disturbing part of that isn't just that Thorin was willing to kill him, but that none of the other dwarves were going to stop him.
That is sad.
That's the hard part.
Well, and I have to think that some of the dwarves, at least, are having a hard time with this decision.
I think
But,
so, yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, Thorin is their king, and nobody wants to cross him now.
No.
Nobody wants to be next, I suppose. But it would be nice to see one of them step up, and not one of them does.
No. I mean, I suppose maybe a quarter of a second later, Balin might have said something, Gandalf says it first, but the fact is none of them did, and that's significant.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a line here that kind of here we have another rabbit reference, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yeah, shook him like
shook
a rabbit.
Poor Bilbo like a rabbit,
That's a very vivid
isn't
image.
it? Yeah, it really is.
It
Not that
speaks
I
to-
go around shaking rabbits, mind you, but you can
No,
really picture
but
that.
it kind of speaks to just how you see Bilbo as very flimsy in Thorin's hands
Yes.
as he's shaking him.
Yeah, even though Bilbo isn't more than probably 6 to 8 inches shorter, he's certainly probably
he's-
less than half the weight.
Right.
And Thorin's very strong. He's a dwarf and quite an accomplished warrior at that. So yeah, he's about ready to fling Bilbo over the wall.
And then just goes off cursing everything.
Oh yeah,
Cursing Gandalf, at least.
I know. I wish I had Gandalf here. I know we can't read all of it.
Yeah.
We'd read the whole chapter if we could, but he starts really going off, and Gandalf reveals himself, of course.
And then I love Gandalf's, if you don't like my burglar, please don't damage him.
Exactly.
And I love that it's my burglar. Gandalf
Yeah.
is here stepping up and not taking ownership, but he's taking some accountability, taking some responsibility for Bilbo's safety here.
Yeah, he's I'm the one who brought him in. I brought him to you, and if you don't like him, please give him back to me. I like what he says. Listen first to what he has to say, there's an implication there that you're not doing a very good job of listening, Thorin.
No, Thorin is not practicing active listening skills at this point, or even passive listening skills.
Yeah, I was going to say.
He's kind of going straight to my kids and just reacting without waiting to hear what anybody has to say.
Yeah, you're right. And overreacting and melodramatic and way out of proportion.
Yep.
But you've got the little bit that Bilbo has to say here, their little conversation. I love this.
I do too, and I'll go ahead and read it now.
Please do.
Dear me, said Bilbo. I am sure this is all very uncomfortable. You may remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I have been told that dwarves are sometimes politer in word than in deed. And the time was all the same when you seemed to think that I had been of some service. Descendant of rats, indeed. Is this all the service of you and your family that I was promised, Thorin? Take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished, and let it go at that. I will, said Thorin grimly, and I will let you go at that, and may we never meet again. Then he turned and spoke over the wall. I am betrayed, he said. It was rightly guessed that I could not forbear to redeem the Arkenstone, the treasure of my house. For it I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems. But that shall be accounted the promised share of this traitor, and with that reward he shall depart, and you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him, if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him. Get down now to your friends, he said to Bilbo, or I will throw you down. What about the gold and silver? Asked Bilbo. That shall follow after, as can be arranged, said he. Get down! Until then we keep the stone, cried Bard. You are not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, said Gandalf. But things may change yet. They may indeed, said Thorin. And already, so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him, he was pondering whether, by the help of Dain, he might not recapture the Arkenstone, and withhold the share of the reward.
Oh, man.
Thorin.
And of course, he called him right before that lovely insult, you descendant of rats.
Descendant of rats. I love that. You know, in a way, that kind of brings us back to the rabbit reference earlier, doesn't it? Because Tolkien actually used it as sort of proof of some of the figurative animal language in The Hobbit. In letter number 319, which was written in 1971 to a children's author and actually also a fellow Inkling, Roger Lancelin Green, Tolkien says, the only English word that influenced the invention, and he's talking about the invention of the word hobbit there, was hole. That granted the description of hobbits, the troll's use of rabbit was merely an obvious insult, of no more etymological significance than Thorin's insult to Bilbo, descendant of rats. So, in case anyone's wondering how hobbits are literally descended from rats, Tolkien basically saying, it's the rat thing is no more significant than the rabbit thing. It's just it's just a way to insult
somebody.
A way to insult somebody. He's smaller than they are. He's scurrying about, and so they're using these words to insult him.
Yeah.
It also reminded me a little bit of, was it Snaga who called Frodo dunghill rat in the Tower of Cirith
I think so.
So yeah, rats, rabbits, none of them are hobbits, but they are little guys who are often beaten up and shaken by the bigger guys.
Yes, they are. I love the snark that Bilbo gets in here about, here he is literally just having been saved from being thrown over the wall. And instead of saying, well, this is my 14th share, I'm just going to leave. He's saying, well, I've been told that dwarves are sometimes politer in word than in deed.
Oh, that is fantastic.
He was told that pretty much by Smaug. That's really the point here, isn't it?
Oh, that's true.
Smaug had suggested that the dwarves were trying to rip him off.
Yeah.
And that, they're going to say things that they don't really mean.
That is true.
It reminds him of all the service. And he's got a little bit of...
he's got some fight in him.
Yeah, he really does. That's a good way to put it. Got some fight into him. He's ticked. Don't just shake me like that.
Just take it that this is my share. I'm doing...
You said I could choose it, and
I chose it. I could choose anything I wanted, and I took it too literally, but...
Yeah. And I did choose it before you said that you claim this unto yourself.
That's true.
I named this unto myself and that unto myself. But boy, Thorin's like, fine. But boy, he never wants to see him again. No friendship goes with you.
No.
He is a traitor. right? When he turns to the crowd or turns to Bard and the Elven King, this is the promised share of this traitor. Which,
yeah.
That's harsh, man.
It is. After everything Bilbo's done for him.
Yeah. Saved his life on more than one occasion.
Saved his life, helped him win his treasure, was instrumental in him winning his treasure.
Key. Absolutely central.
All that is worth nothing because he did this one thing. But, we saw 1 or 2 chapters ago about, how Thorin was already going to jump to the worst possible conclusion if he found out somebody was withholding the Arkenstone.
That's right.
That's exactly what he did.
I will be avenged upon anyone who, we're talking about you're going to kill one of your kin or close friends if it happens that they've taken the stone.
Yeah. You know what else I also just noticed? The way he says, get down now to your friends. He makes a very quick divide between now Bilbo is on the other side. He's decided that Bilbo is now, in league with them. They're your friends now. And then he says, right after that, well, he's not my friend anymore.
Yeah.
He's very quick to throw all that away.
Well, that's like a 5-year-old. I mean, I remember my son coming home from preschool and talking about how so-and-so said they didn't want to be friends with me anymore. And I'm thinking, wow, really, that happens? But it does. And Thorin's sounding just like that, isn't he?
Yeah.
I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah. So capriciously throwing away all their history together.
Yeah. Which is certainly more history than preschool kids have for each other. They're not rescuing each other from spiders or getting them out of elven prisons.
No, so, that is quite true.
Just in their imagination.
Or winning a dragon hoard's worth of gold for them.
Yeah, seriously. Interesting that he decides that, okay, I'm going to give you a 14th share for the Arkenstone. I'm going to give you Bilbo's share, but no gems. What?
That's an interesting little
restriction.
A little restriction to just kind of plug in there.
No gems. No gems for you. I mean, what's the point of that? But hold on to that in your memory banks because we are going to visit that again, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Later on. Yeah. And then I thought this was interesting, too. We have, at the very end of the passage you read, we have 2 examples of optimism. We have Gandalf saying, you're not doing well so far, but things might change. And Thorin agreeing, things might change. But his optimism is that he would be able to get the Arkenstone back without giving up the 14th share.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this good optimism, bad optimism. I just thought it was kind of an interesting little observation.
I like the way you said that. The way I had it in my notes is that Gandalf's, they both say the word may, but Gandalf's may points to hope for positive resolution, whereas Thorin's may points to being able to deceive everybody and get his own way.
I can successfully get my way and deceive
You said
everybody.
that a little bit more eloquently than I did, but
I don't know.
I like it.
It's
a subtle thing that they both say may, and this one simple word may can have such a different tone,
radically different
depending on who's saying it and what their intentions are at the time.
Exactly, and I'll tell you that's something I'm noticing more and more as we read through this time. It's been great to do this book on the podcast. I've been learning.
Tolkien does
more.
a lot of juxtapositions of language and words.
He does.
Yeah.
He's just a master at that, and we begin to see more and more. We'll see that again, I think, in this chapter. There's that alliterative pair that we were both stunned to see on multiple occasions. Let's see. So Bilbo takes off. He goes down from the wall, goes to his new friends. Hello, new friends. Interesting that the narrator tells us that more than one of the dwarves felt shame and pity. But he doesn't identify which ones.
So they're conflicted about it. But
no one spoke up. No one said anything.
Yeah.
Probably because they didn't want to get the wrath of Thorin. But you got to wonder which ones, besides Balin and Fili and Kili, probably. But yeah.
Maybe Bombur.
Maybe
Bilbo
Bombur did certainly have
point.
He did too, yeah. I love that conversation that he had with Bombur the night, when he went down, which was just the night before this. It just was a couple weeks ago,
right? Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I love that Bilbo doesn't just leave, right? He leaves with courtesy. He tells to his friends, farewell.
Farewell.
We may meet again as friends. That's so proper. It's Bagginsy, to still retain your civility and your manners.
But I think it's also sincere too.
I think it is.
Totally. I think it's more than just that sort of Bagginsy politeness that we saw in the first chapter. I think he really sincerely does want to meet again with them as friends. He doesn't want it to end this way.
No, he doesn't. And I'm sure he knows. He could probably see it in their faces that they felt shame and pity. He knows they're stuck in a hard spot, that they can't go against their king, but they haven't fallen quite as severely to the dragon sickness as he has.
Right.
So yeah, he hopes for the best, and I love that. That's a sign of hope. That maybe it'll be different at some point.
He hopes that even though this is going badly right now, that there still can be some positive resolution.
Yeah, maybe there will be a peace, and that after that peace, we can be friends again.
This will all blow over.
Yes, it will. We hope so.
Go to the Winchester, and this can all blow over. I know you haven't seen Shaun of the Dead, but
no, I haven't. So I missed that reference.
Go to the Winchester, have a pint, and wait for this all to blow over.
I'm sure we have a lot of people laughing at that right now, and I'm not one of them, and that's very sad. I shall have to remedy that at some point.
You should watch every movie that has Shaun in the title.
Well, I've watched Shaun the Sheep. Does that help?
You're halfway there.
I am probably halfway there. I think you're right.
Oh, man.
Interesting. I have to wonder. Thorin remembers the mithril coat, but he's remembered it after Bilbo swung down from the wall. I have to wonder, did he not?
Oh,
did
wait,
he just
that.
literally
I should
forget?
have. All right, take it. Fine.
Oh, fine. You've got it already. What am I going to do?
Oh, you have mail? All right, fine.
I mean, I'm thinking that if he'd remembered, he'd have been like, no, give me that armor first.
Give
You're
me
not
the
leaving
shirt
with that.
first.
He's got to
Probably.
know how much that's worth.
Absolutely, yeah. He has to. Maybe he just thought it's going to be very hard to get a mithril coat off of a hobbit who doesn't want to take it off.
That's true. That's true. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't hack it off. It doesn't work that way.
Right, exactly. It's not going to work
I guess you can shoot him in the heel, which is what he threatens to do.
I suppose he could, well, that's kind of gruesome. He could hack off all the appendages sticking out of it and just pull it off. But
Goodness,
that's a little bad even for Thorin.
That is a little, that would
be orcish.
That would be very orcish indeed. I mean, that totally reminds me of
Gelmir.
Gelmir, yeah, exactly.
Gelmir him.
To Gelmir him.
I'm sorry to bring up that image. I don't know why.
Boy, I don't know why you did either.
Too much coffee before recording today.
That is gruesome, man. See, that's the thing. You watch those kinds of like horror movies, and I don't. So that never would have come to mind. To my pure, wholesome,
yes,
quality mind.
Right. Right. Yeah. We know a thing or two about that.
Sure. The threat, though, is so petty. Like, I'm going to shoot you in your feet.
Shoot your feet. Sting your miserable feet. Like, dude, come on.
Come on. Just be over this already, will you?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I love the Bard is of the trust but verify school of thought. We'll come back and we'll see if you've brought the portion. And if it's done without deceit, then we will leave.
Yeah.
I love that. It's not like, we're gonna trust you. No.
He knows what he's doing. Bard's got a good head on his shoulders.
He really does.
He knows how far gone Thorin is.
Which is why Roach told him to trust Bard.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Speaking of Roach, we get Thorin sends messengers by Roach. So hopefully he thinks that Dain is on the way. And that's what I'm going to read next is Dain's arrival.
All right.
So here we go.
This is a cool scene.
It is.
I'm excited for this one.
I really do. I love this. That day passed and the night. The next day, the wind shifted west, and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarves had appeared round the eastern spur of the mountain and was now hastening to Dale. Dain had come. He had hurried on through the night, and so had come upon them sooner than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with hose of a fine and flexible metal mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by Dain's people. The dwarves are exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them had also a short broadsword at his side and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plaited and thrust into their belts. Their caps were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called men and elves to arms. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near the camp, and there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in a sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. "We are sent from Dain, son of Nain," they said when questioned. "We are hastening to our kinsmen in the mountains since we learned that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls?" Well, this, of course, in the polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, meant simply, "You have no business here. We are going on, so make way or we shall fight you." I'm picturing
The translation is wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful, but I'm picturing it kind of like the old Japanese monster movies, where like the dwarf is actually mouthing the words, "We are sent from Dain, son of Nain," and Tolkien behind is saying, "You have no business here. We are going on, so make way. Oh, we shall fight you." Like, really bad translation and voiceover.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's just such an image. But I do love this scene. This is an intimidating army. 500 may not sound like a lot of guys, and it's not, but oh man.
They are armed to the teeth.
Seriously, and armored. Like, you're not going to get through this stuff.
I mean, these guys are, all the dwarves we've seen so far are Thorin's company. They're vagabonds.
They're bomber. They're bomber, and they're old, they're old like Balin and
Keely and Feely, who are just kind of like, young and impressionable.
They're harp players. They're musicians. Right. They're artists. They're happy guys.
Right. They're adventurers. They're not soldiers.
No.
You know?
I mean, I know the movie cast them to be warriors along with like Dwalin and maybe a couple others, but they're really not warriors here.
No.
I mean,
as far as we know, the only ones that actually have any military experience would be Thorin and Balin.
And was Dwalin? No. I don't
remember if Dwalin.
I think that's only a movie thing that Dwalin was with him at.
Dwalin is kind of like the tough one in the movie, but
not in this. Not in the.
I think in the book, we know Balin was there, but I don't know about Dwalin.
Yeah,
but he probably was. I guess if Balin was there, they're brothers. But still, I mean, but these Dain's dwarves, this is an army. These are warriors.
And they're seriously. I mean, you look at them. Not only do they have the steel mail, steel mail hauberk that goes all the way down to their knees, and then their lower legs are covered with this
metal mesh.
This really cool dwarven pantyhose, I guess. I mean, really, it's some sort of like. You can't get a run in this, though.
No, not at all. This is like a really. I imagine
like
a really fine. It's a really fine mail.
Yeah,
and I love that detail because the fact that they're the only ones who know how to make it.
I love that.
They're not just warriors, but they're craftsmen. I mean, these are like the elite dwarves in every way. You know?
Yes, they really are.
These dwarves are everything.
These are strong, even for dwarves. And look at what they're wielding.
These mattocks.
Now, you've got some word nerdery on mattock, don't you?
I do. I
need you. I called out to you. I said, Sean, give me some word nerdery on mattocks.
I had to look it up, actually. I mean, I knew sort of what it was. But it's an agricultural tool, and I kind of had a sense of that. But basically, it's used for digging and chopping. It's kind of similar to a pickaxe. If you imagine basically blades at right angles to the handle, and one of them is horizontal, sort of like a hoe or an adze, if you know that ancient tool.
The adze, yeah.
So one is like that, and then the other one on the other side is either vertical, like an axe, and that's called a cutter mattock, or you could also have a pick mattock, which is instead of an axe on that side, you'd have a pick on that side. Okay. So you basically got like a hoe on one side.
The front blade is horizontal, like it would.
You could swing it overhand to either dig in the ground or to dig into somebody's head.
Right. Right. So instead of splitting them left to right, you're splitting them front to back.
Yeah. See, you got it in you.
See, well, I've watched enough Vikings to know.
Right. Yeah, and then on the other side, you've either got like an axe or a pick.
Or a pick. Ooh, goodness.
But it's also something that doubles as an agricultural tool, which kind of reminds me of the way we've talked about how the dwarves are militia. They've got this tool that's both... something they would use, for mining and digging, as well as for fighting.
Yeah.
As far as the strict word nerdery part, it's a really old word. Some linguists actually believe that it has roots back in Proto-Germanic and even further back to Proto-Indo-European words for plowshare. Yeah.
Oh, for plowshare. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it also is possibly, if this theory is correct, it's possibly related to words for hoe and digging implement that range across the Indo-European languages from like Germanic and Latin to Slavic and even Sanskrit. Sort of the eastern edge of the Indo-European distribution.
Indo-European. Wow, my goodness.
So a very
old word, but it makes sense.
A very old tool.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Is it's going to be one of those? It's got to be one of the earliest tools.
One of those first tools that
helped make
humanity produced.
Yeah, that helped turn us from hunter gatherers into into people able to do farming.
Right.
and stay, build a
To
city
stay in one
that kind of
place,
thing.
to build
Right.
civilizations as opposed to sort of a nomadic
Right.
wandering.
So
Another
they're
interesting
wielding
thing about,
these, and they're two-handed mattocks, so they're big.
yeah,
These are
Yeah.
nasty weapons, but they also have short swords and round shields.
isn't that awesome?
And then they still have iron caps and iron shoes.
Yeah, these guys are tough.
They're really tough, and they're prepared. I love this. Their beards, they're already forked and plated and stuck in their belts. They're like, we're not messing around. The beards aren't going to get in our way.
Even our beards are armed.
Even our beards are ready
armored.
for war.
Yep.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And even after this long battle, they still had supplies. They had brought. We don't see that.
They
I
were
don't
carrying
think-
packs of food and supplies on top of all this.
Isn't that amazing? That is just incredible. Yeah, I mean that part we didn't read, but the great store of supplies. They each bore huge packs on their backs. Wow.
Yeah.
This is a bad army, man.
These guys are tough. Like you said, 500 may not seem like a lot, but if it's these guys,
Yeah.
this is a tough
This
army.
is 500 elites. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big force. Very, very
Yep.
powerful. And Bard really figures out what they're doing. They're here to break the siege, reinforce the mountain, and wait for more dwarves. They might not be able to, defeat the armies combined of the Elven King and the men, but supplying the dwarves buys them time. And that's all
Right.
you need in a siege, is to wait until you can get a superior force.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why Bard is smart.
Bard is really smart.
He knows what's going on here. And
I love the narrator. Bard, of course, refused to allow that.
isn't that cool? Yeah, I know. It's
I
kind of
love
like,
that.
and you know this too, right, reader?
Yeah, that's right. Come on,
yes,
reader.
yes,
You've
I
seen
knew
through
that all
this.
along, of course.
I know. I love the way Tolkien assumes his readers are intelligent.
Yeah.
And plays to that,
Because we are, of course.
Of course we are. The smartest people I know.
Around. Yeah.
And so Dane's messengers go back, without any sort of agreement, and obviously there's going to be some tension here. Because those were the plans. That was exactly what they
That
were
was
gonna do.
exactly the plan, yeah.
Oh, you guessed it.
We figured that out, okay.
Let's
try
after
something
that.
Maybe it's time for us to talk a little bit about who is this fellow who comes on the scene here, this Dain, son of Nain.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit on him here. Like Bard, he's actually a late invention of Tolkien's. He was a result of the change in the story from Bilbo being the original Dragon Slayer. In fact, although his appearance is a natural result of the decision to keep Bard alive earlier, Dain still wasn't around until the final set of plot notes that Tolkien wrote.
That's right.
John Ratliff has some stuff on this, and he reveals that it was only after Tolkien realized that the siege couldn't be resolved diplomatically that he says, the idea of bringing a dwarven army to the scene was one of the last plot points to emerge. No such army is described as playing a part in those earlier notes.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, Ratliff goes on to say that, like Bard, or later Arwen, Dain is a character Tolkien introduces abruptly to fill a specific plot function, in this case to bring a dwarven army to the fight at the mountain. But with his usual keen eye to potentialities, once the character is present, Tolkien makes good use of him. And boy, does he.
And that's what's so cool, because just his mere presence is something that could have just been a plot function.
Oh, yeah,
But then, after, spoiler alert, Thorin dies,
Right.
Dain's role actually expands significantly. Thorin's death, which, let's face it, would have been quite an unexpected occurrence in a children's fantasy book of the era.
That's true.
That didn't happen a lot in children's
No,
books.
George
having a
R.
major
Martin had
character
not been
die.
writing yet.
Right.
Not that he writes children's fantasy, by the way. Just making that clear.
Not quite. But yeah, you wouldn't expect a major character to die like this.
No,
And once
no,
he
not
did, Tolkien suddenly found himself needing a new king under the mountain, somebody who could restore that realm, because there were these prophecies in place that had said that all this stuff would happen. And in order for those prophecies to be true, he needed a character to do that.
Right. The prophecy still had to come true. And that meant needing a new king under the mountain.
Right.
And this is where we begin to see a really great comparison with another pair of characters in the Legendarium. We love doing this kind of stuff. This is so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
The connection between Dain and Thorin is like the one between Faramir and Boromir. They are the close relations who stand successfully where their kinsmen had previously failed. Ratliff even goes on to point out that Gandalf, after his death and return, described himself as Saruman as he should have been.
Right.
Dain, then, in many ways, really is Thorin as he should have been. not that Thorin was Saruman. I mean,
well, no, not.
No, I mean, unlike Boromir and Thorin,
A difference
Saruman,
of degrees, yeah.
Yeah, it's degrees, and really the key is that Boromir and Thorin both repented for their actions. Saruman never
True.
did.
That's
I
true.
wrote a pondering on that last year. My goodness, that might have even been the year before that. Now that I think about
I
it,
remember that. That was awesome. Yeah, that
it
was one of your
compared
first.
Boromir and Saruman. Yeah, it was an early pondering, and I really go back to that a lot. I'm looking forward to exploring more of that when we get to those points in Lord of the Rings. But that whole idea of repentance, which we'll see next chapter for Thorin, certainly separates him from Saruman. But the idea is just that if Gandalf is Saruman as he should have been, and Faramir is in a way Boromir as he should have been,
then Dain is Thorin as he should have been. Yeah.
And that's even with Thorin having been a really capable leader. Well, I mean, right up to the point where he wasn't.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, if we look fairly at Thorin, really honestly throughout the text, we do see right up until the dragon sickness a leader who, he was self-important. Yeah, he was a little haughty, but he was fair. He was just. He was usually courageous. He wouldn't leave his people behind. I still think back to...
We saw that just a couple
multiple
of chapters
occasions.
ago.
Yeah. So and it's a really interesting comparison.
It is, and I think that's a good point because it may seem like we're beating up on Thorin a little bit, and we certainly have been these last couple of chapters because he's gotten to be a pretty bad guy, but he was
dragon sickness.
Yeah, but he was a good guy. He was a capable leader previously.
And fortunately, we'll see him redeem that too.
And what we've got here is really just a case of a fall. We see a fall here, which brings me to...
all good stories have fallen. That's true.
Indeed, they do. Yeah, and Tolkien especially loves to use it.
Masterful.
As a plot point. But anyway, Ratliff says this better than we can.
Of course he does.
Of course he does. He says, Dain is all this and more. Thorin as he is meant to be, who, either because of example of Thorin's fall before him, or more likely because of an unshakable bedrock of good sense and a lack of overmode, again, compare with Faramir's ability to avoid repeating Boromir's mistakes, is able to resist the dragon sickness. Dain deals out the treasure fairly, keeps his bargains, and establishes good relations with his neighbors. All the things Thorin should have done, and that we, like Bilbo, expected him to do, based on our experience of him prior to his glimpsing the dragon gold.
That's a good point. I mean, Bilbo would have expected that. We expected that because that is who he had been right up until that point.
And we even saw how much that image of Thorin still stuck in Bilbo's mind when he thought that giving the Arkenstone over would end all this.
I know, that would end it well.
Yeah.
But interestingly, it may have been this development, this bringing Dain along, that led to, catch this, the deaths of Fili and Kili. This is kind of an interesting diversion here, but Ratliff points out that their deaths, they weren't included, by the way, until the typescript stage. So they weren't in any of the plot notes. They weren't in any of the manuscripts. They didn't happen until he was typing the story out. That their deaths were likely added to avoid confusion about Dain taking the throne. We've talked at length a couple times about which one of Fili and Kili is older and thus in the line of kingship behind Thorin. But, it turns out it really doesn't matter. I wish I'd known this before, but, Tolkien had Dain become king under the mountain before he chose to kill off Fili and Kili, right? I mean, their deaths didn't happen until the typescript. Dain's arrival and eventual successor as the king under the mountain happened in plot notes prior to that. So that tells us that in Tolkien's mind, the kingship is patrilineal. That is, it's traced only through the line of male descendants. And since Fili and Kili are the sons of Thorin's sister, they would never have succeeded him anyway.
Wow, that's interesting. And we've spent a lot of time talking about him wanting to
And
preserve one of them to keep the lineage alive. Oops.
I know. There goes that whole idea of, don't send the captain and the first officer on the same away team.
Right. I've always thought that they were going to succeed him, and the only reason they don't is because they die. But
even if they would not have been.
It works out well because Dain, that gave Tolkien the opportunity to create this character of Dain.
Exactly, and to
show,
rich him, make him full. And like Bard, you keeping him alive instead of killing him, now you get to do something with him that's interesting.
Yeah. He becomes more than just the sort of Deus Ex Machina character that comes in to deal with a plot point, and he becomes a character in his own right. He becomes a foil for Thorin, as we talked about. So that's super cool.
That is cool. I really enjoy that. And we'll actually have even a little bit more on Dain next week, too, won't we?
We certainly will, because we're going to see a little bit more of him next chapter.
Yes, we
will. But I guess now we should probably, since we have digressed
probably move on to the next.
Nicely.
That was a nice digression, though. I liked it.
Well, I think I've got the next passage here, don't I?
I think you do. I think you do.
Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp, all was now astir, as if for battle. Well, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
For the dwarves of Dain were advancing along the eastern bank. "Fools," laughed Bard, "to come thus beneath the mountain's arm. They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard put to it. Let us set on them now from both sides, before they are fully rested." But the Elven King said, "Long will I tarry ere I begin this war for gold. The dwarfs cannot pass us unless we will, or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows." But he reckoned without the dwarfs. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also, they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends, and resolved to strike while they debated.
Man, that just...
Not only did they break their promise to leave the gold,
Yeah.
but then when Bard sends the messengers looking for them, they shoot at them.
Yeah. Han shot first. Let's just be clear. I mean, really, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
So somehow it was cool when he did it. I mean,
I know, that's true. It was. Yeah.
Greedo kind of had it coming. These guys, not so much.
Should have shot him when he sat down, but that's another movie. I think in the movie, don't they have the elves shoot first? I don't remember. I think they do. I think the elves shoot first, and the dwarves use those weird anti-arrow artillery thing.
Yeah,
anyway,
something like that.
I don't remember because I've only seen that one once. You're not going to get me to watch Battle of the Five Armies again. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, it was a hard one to watch.
Yeah, it was. It was deeply difficult. But you know, one of the things that makes that so difficult is that beautiful line of the Elven King. I love that line.
I talked about this one. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Or did I bring it
up?
It
was one of your moments.
It was. I thought it was, yeah. Because this is one of my favorite quotes from the Elven King, and that's why you gave it to me. Thank you very much.
Yep. You are welcome, sir.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Elven King in a nutshell. I mean, we've talked about he's greedy, he's petty, he's a lot
prideful.
of bad. He's prideful. He's a lot of bad things. But he is still good people. Remember that?
That's exactly right.
Elves they were and remain, and that is good people.
Good people.
And the Elven King really does not want to start a war for gold.
No.
He may want the gold, but he doesn't want to kill for it.
No.
And I think that that's an important distinction.
And he wants reconciliation.
He does, yeah.
And he recognizes that conflict is not the desired goal. Unhappy
And he still
blows.
has hope. He still has hope for, puts him in the same camp as Gandalf.
And it kind of brings Bard down a notch a little bit because here's Bard, he's ticked. I understand. I mean, he's rightfully ticked. They went to go pick up the 14th of the
This guy's got shot at. Of course he's upset. Yeah.
My men had been shot at. This is not cool. But, it kind of reminds us that Bard has, to some extent, fallen a little bit under the dragon sickness. We kind of talked about this last episode, too, so...
Yeah.
It's like impatience. Like men, and this makes sense. I mean, men are mortal. We have shorter lives.
Yeah.
I think we always see in Tolkien's story that elves tend to have more patience than men.
Yeah.
And this is an example of that.
Because they do have time. But, men...
They do. Yeah.
But it's also just something in men. Yeah, we just have impatience, lack of foresight. And,
maybe.
And there's a bit of that here.
Yeah, little emotional decision-making.
Yeah.
But the dwarves attack, and they attack for two reasons, right? The Arkenstone is in the hands of the men, and because they sensed hesitation. Wow.
Taking advantage of a weakness in their opponents. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
It really is. This is one of the saddest moments in the book. I mean, I think I said that right as you finished the reading. I was just like, oh, the sorrow, the sadness that this is could cause. And yet... we're about to see something that looks like bad news, but is amazingly good news, and we'll get to why that is.
Something happens just in the nick of time.
Indeed. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky. Winter thunder on a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain. Wow. I'm stopping there in the middle because even though I selected that and read that in my head, reading it out loud, do you hear that alliteration?
The alliteration, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Winter thunder on a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain, and lightning lit its peak.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Awesome.
beautiful.
That is awesome.
And beneath the thunder, another blackness could be seen whirling forward. But it did not come with the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds, so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. "Halt!" cried Gandalf, who appeared suddenly and stood alone with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. "Halt!" he called in a voice like thunder, and his staff blazed forth with a flash like the lightning. "Dread has come upon you all. Alas, it has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you. Bolg of the North is coming, O Dain, whose father you slew in Moria. Behold, the bats are above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train." Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and gazed at the sky. The elves cried out with many voices. "Come," called Gandalf. "There is yet time for counsel. Let Dain, son of Nain, come swiftly to us." What a moment. What a dramatic, powerful moment.
Yeah. Starting with, man, you're not kidding about the alliteration, and I noticed it all over that paragraph.
Amazing. Yeah.
And the visual image of this black cloud and the thunder, the storm coming, and then this other blackness coming from the north.
A literal storm with
with a literal storm with a figurative storm of enemies coming.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
This really, the dramatic moment, this is much more dramatic than having, I don't know, giant worms poking holes in the mountainside and armies streaming forth. I'm just saying, if somebody were crazy enough to do that.
Don't make me do the Shai Hulud thing again, because I don't. Shai Hulud.
By the way, I would just add this. There's a sentence here that reminds me that I was right when it came to the Venn diagram about lupine characters. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. I.e., wolves
good catch.
are not all wolves are wargs.
Yeah.
Just a reminder of that.
That's a good catch.
Yeah,
I'm surprised you didn't pick up on the fact that there are bats here. I know how much you love bats.
Well, I did pick up on the fact that they don't actually count as one of the armies.
Yeah.
So that's for later. But you know what I wanted to mention, and I know we'll spend a lot more time on this in a later section tonight. The arrival of these goblins. I remember thinking about this as we were preparing for the chapter, and I didn't even realize quite how much we were going to be talking about the term later. Is that the arrival of these goblins is truly a eucatastrophe.
It is. It seems like the worst possible thing that can happen.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it instantly, and you see the way Gandalf steps into the middle and says, "Halt."
Yeah.
You know, that gives him a reason, that gives something to get everybody's attention so that they can stop and just sort of get this quick truce between the men, the elves, and the dwarves that, you know, they can stick together and all, you know, turn to face the goblins.
Absolutely. And we'll spend a lot more time on that
and we will talk
later.
more about that, but it is significant because, you know, when we talk about eucatastrophes at the end of The Hobbit, everybody always picks up on one.
Well, yeah, it's a fairly obvious one.
A fairly obvious one that's coming with the eagles. But, you know, as Corey Olson pointed out, and I think is very, very clear here, the goblins' arrival is a eucatastrophe as well.
It really is, in a very different way.
Sort of a two-step eucatastrophe.
Yes.
It's the Erebor two-step.
The Erebor two-step. Oh, well, there's your resident Texan making a comment there.
I'm required actually to
I think you are mandatory.
A reference
I think
to his two-step at least once a season. Yeah,
I think so. I think there's probably some sort of legal obligation.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure, along with stakes, references of stakes.
Yeah, well, we've
got to get those in.
We reference stakes quite frequently anyway.
Yeah, yes, we do, for many good reasons. But let's go ahead. We're not going to read this next little bit here, but we learn who the armies were. You know, how I don't know about you, but I see this question all the time. So who were the five armies in Battle of the Five Armies? And I just want to say, well, can you just look right here in the text?
It's very clear right here in the text.
It's so simple. That one side you've got goblins wild wolves, and then you've got elves, men, and dwarves. Yeah. So the bats are not an army, the eagles are not an army, and Beorn, as powerful as he is not an army.
that one man, half bear that he is not an army.
Who ends up probably winning the battle single-handedly, still not an army.
Yeah. There's even a little shade in Doug Anderson's annotated Hobbit for the Rankin Bass movie for including the eagles. Did you catch that?
I did.
If folks who have the annotated Hobbit, go check out his footnotes to this chapter. He makes a little comment about the Rankin Bass movie. Shade.
Yeah, it's good. We get some more narrative exposition here, basically kind of explaining how. Because, hey, wait a minute, what? The goblins, wolves? I thought we were done with those guys. And so the narrator takes time to explain kind of how this happened. That the goblins are still ticked about the great goblin's death. I kind of think like, who knew they cared so much? I'd be like, well, now I'm the king. Some goblins saying, and why would they really care? But apparently they do. They just like to get angry, I guess. So they're going to win the North now. So they build and create this big army. Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Very nice.
What the eye commands.
I'll make sure you get all of Sauron's dialogue in Lord of the Rings. See what I did there?
I do see exactly what you did there. I'm like, well, that's going to be a short passage. I see you. So sorry. We definitely digress. I do love this kind of reference to Gandalf's limited knowledge, though. There's a line that right before your next passage about how much Gandalf knew cannot be said, but it is plain that he had not expected this sudden assault.
Yeah.
That really is shocking in a way. I mean, you'd think that Gandalf would have had some sort of word, but he did not certainly expect, at least not this sudden nature of it. I'm sure he knew there was an army building.
He probably knew that that the armies were starting to mobilize, that they were reacting to the great goblins.
But this was much quicker than he expected.
Yeah, exactly. He had not expected this sudden assault, the text clearly tells us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I think we now understand why the worms were involved. Not even the ravens knew of their coming until they came out in the broken lands. How else do you break a land but a giant worm?
Worm sign.
I'm just...
Yep.
Anyway.
They got their thumpers out there, and, the worms
they
came.
got their thumpers. There
get the maker hooks and grab on and just ride them all the way where the Harkonnens are hanging out.
I'm going to, before we go really too far down the Dune Road, which would be a lot of fun, I'm going to have you read the next passage that talks about the strategy they come up with.
All right. This is the plan that he made in council with the Elven King and with Bard. And I should point out that that's Gandalf we're talking about.
Right, that he is Gandalf, right.
And with Dain, for the Dwarf Lord now joined them. The goblins were the foes of all, and at their coming all other quarrels were forgotten.
You catastrophe.
Yeah.
Quite. I mean, really, that's what this
is. That's exactly what he's saying there.
Yep.
Their only hope was to lure the goblins into the valley between the arms of the mountain, and themselves to man the great spurs that struck south and east. Yet this would be perilous, if the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself, and so attack them also from behind and above. But there was no time to make any other plan, or to summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast. But the bat cloud came, flying lower, over the shoulder of the mountain, and whirled above them, shutting out the light, and filling them with dread. "To the mountain!" called Bard. "To the mountain! Let us take our places while there is yet time."
I tried not to laugh when you said bat cloud, just because I don't know why. It just made me think, like, is that some sort of gadget that Batman has?
It's what Batman calls his smoke grenades.
There's the bat signal. It shines on top of the bat cloud.
I'm just thinking,
anyway.
Fetch the bat cloud grenades, Robin. That was my Adam West impression. I know you couldn't tell.
Well, Adam West, his lines are also just deadpan. That was brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you.
So they discuss the tactics of troop placement. They really don't have much time to develop a more sophisticated plan than that. In fact, I can hear Gandalf saying, "No time for that either." Go.
Go, fight.
I love that there's the narrator kind of points out, this is a dangerous plan if there are enough goblins to overwhelm them.
To overrun the mountain itself.
There are.
Right. And we're about to see that.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It's going to basically rain down goblins.
Wasn't there a song like that in the disco 70s? It's raining goblins.
It's raining goblins.
Yeah. So we get the battle coming, right? First we see the vanguard, right? The front of the army coming in. Ever since we talked about the vanguard in,
you just imagine
the word vanguard is okay, but it was when it was so and so in the van.
It was some of the Noldor that were in the van. Was it Feanor in the van?
With the airbrush painting on the side. Yeah. So the vanguard comes around, the leading elements of the army. Obviously, these are going to be the fastest wolf riders. And then some brave men who hopefully got out of the way in time. But there's enough of this, sort of a draw them in, make a feint of a fight and then flee so that they come pouring into the valley so that then you can get them on the so you got them on the flanks. Now that we've gotten to that point, I'm going to go ahead and pick up. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all Bilbo's experiences, and the one which, at the time, he hated most. Which is to say, it was the one he was most proud of, and most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I may say he put on his ring early in the business and vanished from sight, if not from all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection in a goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but it does help in getting out of the way, and it prevents your head from being specially chosen for a sweeping stroke by a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame, so deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. And boy, there's more of that alliteration, huh? Flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught and the elf charge was halted, there rose from across the valley a deep-throated roar, with cries of "Moria!" and "Dain! Dain!" The dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and beside them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic came upon the goblins, and even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down the river to escape from the trap, and many of their own wolves were turning upon them and rending the dead and the wounded. Victory seemed at hand, when a cry rang out on the heights above.
That's not going to end well.
That's not going to end well at all, no.
Such a great moment.
That's such a powerful passage. I love that.
Vivid battle description.
It really is. It's short, really. I mean, from the elves were the first to charge, you're talking 3 short paragraphs.
Yeah, but powerful.
What a moment. Hold on to that moment about the spears and swords shining with a gleam of chill flame, by the way. Just a hint. Keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that in a bit.
But I love that. Again, another moment of alliteration that I didn't catch without reading it out loud.
The flickering.
Flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Let's talk about that real quick, about the gleam of chill flame. This is an interesting conversation that we might have here. I don't know. Are these gleaming like Sting?
Like Sting and Orcrist and Glamdring? Are they literally glowing?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, this doesn't sound like a metaphorical. They shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame.
I honestly don't know, because I didn't think about this until we were talking about this before we started recording.
I know.
And I haven't really had a chance to look into it. But, I mean, I thought that was just Gondolin technology, that it was only swords of the Noldor.
At least Noldoran, right.
And, obviously these are wood elves, these are Teleri, and these are not even the high Teleri of
you're right.
They're Nandor. and Sindar, led by Sindar. So, yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have this if it's Gondolin technology, but
it seems like it's powered by their hatred for the goblins. I mean, that's
interesting.
I
don't know. I don't know if they're literally gleaming or if they're just sort of gleaming in the sunlight. I haven't decided yet.
That's a good point, gleaming in the sunlight. The chill flame, though, made me think, I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but it certainly reminded me, because of the use of the language, the chill flame. That made me think of Fingolfin's challenge. And the fact that when he drew his sword, it glittered like ice.
Ringil.
The chill is what made me think. Yeah, Ringil. It totally made me think of that, and how there's this bitter nature to this hatred that the elves have for the goblins, just as Fingolfin would have had for Morgoth at that moment.
That's interesting.
That maybe that powers this somehow. I don't know.
Maybe so.
I mean, even the arrows flickered as they left the bows with
fire,
as if with fire. So. There's something
that makes me wonder if
magical.
maybe it's just, I don't know. I mean, the fact that it's the arrows, too, makes me wonder if it's just the sunlight shining on it. But it seems like it's more than that. It really does.
It does. I would tend to land there, that it is more than that. There's something...
There's something about it. Something about the elves' hatred makes their weapons glow.
Yeah.
Now, why that makes Bilbo's sword glow in his hands...
Different. Maybe that's a different technology.
Maybe that's it.
I don't know.
Maybe so.
I mean, I don't know. Chill flame does make me think blue, and that makes me think of Sting and Glamdring and Orcrist. But maybe in that case, the maker's hatred of the goblins
hatred. Maybe
is embedded into the swords.
And maybe that's it. Maybe it's the hatred of the smiths, the hatred of the elves in general.
And maybe that's what is specifically Noldorin or Gondolin in origin, is the ability to embed that into the weapon, no matter who carries it.
That's an interesting thought.
It really is.
All speculative, and I don't think we'll find an answer anywhere. But we might be able to.
No,
they might be able to look back and see some of the descriptions of Sting and things like that to see if there's.
Yeah. Well, we've got
clues.
Stinging Fire, by the way, which I love.
Good
use
point.
Of that word, but and I do love how both sides really, or all three sides really partner up together. The elves charge first, and only after that charge has kind of died down and the goblins are beginning to recover from that, then the dwarves pile in with their mattocks, and then the men with their long swords. Yeah.
They really have come together. They really are working together.
They really, and really, if it weren't for just sheer overwhelming numbers, they would have won. Victory was at hand. I love how the wolves, by the way, are turning on their own. That's just a reminder that you just can't control them. They are wolves. Yeah.
Wild animals.
But so the battle continues, and now we see the bad news, right? The goblins have come over the mountain instead of just coming around. They'll be coming around the mountain when they come.
I'm still thinking it's raining goblins.
It's raining goblins, and we get that now victory is gone. Now it's just going to be a matter of sheer survival. That's just it. And now we can't even think of victory. We just have to try to think of survival. Now we get wargs, right? So now it's not just the wolves that were turning on the dead. Now we've got a host of wargs.
The wargs that were in the train.
Come the bodyguard of Bolg. Goblins of huge size. I noticed this, scimitars of steel. We've talked before about how it always seems like the bad guys are the ones carrying the curved swords. Just another,
that's true.
That Tolkien kind of follows through with that theme. And then
just something to mark them as other, kind of make them different from the good guys.
And this is why I don't like bats.
Because they fastened vampire-like on the stricken?
Or even just swirling about the heads and ears. Get that thing away from me.
Because the vampire fastening would probably do it for me.
Well, yeah, the first time I see a vampire bat, jumping on one of my dead buddies, and I'm done. I'm out of there. Boy, talk about morale sapping, really. Ooh.
Yeah. Because the goblins not only have not only have an army, but they have animals, wild animals that they've brought to the fight.
The bats,
the wolves, the wargs, and the bats, and and they're against you too. Ugh.
Don't bring a sword to a bat fight.
I thought you were going to say don't bring a bat to a sword fight. Cause,
but
if you bring a baseball bat, that wouldn't be very helpful.
Apparently you should bring a bat to a sword fight. Because
a vampire bat, not a baseball bat.
Can flitter around the heads and ears of the people with the swords until they drop their swords, and then they get vampire-like.
They get vampire.
Yeah, that's just bad.
Bleh.
Bad. As quickly as the battle looked like it was turning in their favor, we now see that it looks like it's turning against them.
Yeah.
And as that's happening, Sean, I'm going to have you pick up a very dramatic moment here.
Okay. Suddenly there was a great shout, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin. Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell outward with a crash into the pool. Out leapt the king under the mountain, and his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armor, and red light leapt from their eyes. In the gloom the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on, leapt down to the fall's foot, and rushed forward to battle. Wolf and rider fell or fled before them. Thorin wielded his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. "To me! To me! Elves and men, to me! O my kinsfolk!" he cried, and his voice shook like a horn in the valley.
Wow.
Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarves of Dain to his help. Down, too, came many of the lakemen, for Bard could not restrain them. And out upon the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves.
Can we just point out the incredible wow factor in that last line? I mean,
Even
it's
the
one
spearmen
thing,
of the elves are coming to his aid, yeah.
Spearmen of the elves
Yeah.
are hearing Thorin's cry and obeying.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge moment.
This is the single greatest moment of
Yes.
unity that we've seen in this book.
Yes, and it is a wonderful moment, and Thorin is the center point of it. This is King Thorin really coming into his own right here. The dragon sickness is gone. Olsen has a great phrase that I really loved. This charge shows that his self-absorption has turned to self-sacrifice. This is a king ready to do the right thing. Amazing moment. And I love this. You know how one of the lines we get in the prophecies is about that gold would flow from the gate of the mountain? Mm-hmm. Do you notice how Thorin's described? That he gleamed like gold in a dying fire. He gleamed
like gold in a dying fire. Wow, that's a good catch.
That's so cool. So cool.
You know, what it made me think of was from Lord of the Rings, Theoden's last charge.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? Fey he seemed, or the battle fury of his fathers ran like new fire in his veins.
I'm getting chills just hearing it.
Then the last part of that, his golden shield was uncovered, and lo, it shone like an image of the sun, and the grass flamed into green about the white feet of his steed. So you even get that image of the flame, yeah. Oh,
the flame and the gold, and
And even if I recall, Theoden actually has the rallying cry, the "to me, to me."
To me, Eorlingus, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a cool connection, but you're right, it really does
catch.
But it does fit that prophecy as well, the gold flowing from the gate. Yeah.
Things start to happen and going in their favor, right? The goblins are getting shredded left and right. Wargs are scattered. We don't read this part, but the wargs get scattered. But Bolg's bodyguard,
they can't get through the bodyguard.
This.
No.
These are tough ones. These are the elite.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line right after that I am going to read, even though it's not part of our reading, because it's really somber and really poignant. Already behind him, among the goblin dead, lay many men and many dwarves, and many a fair elf that should have lived yet long ages merrily in the wood. That reminder again about elf serial longevity or immortality, and how, he doesn't say that extra bit about the men and the dwarves, and that's not because their deaths aren't worth mourning. It's that those men and those dwarves are going to die anyway.
They're going to die anyway.
500 years from now, those men and dwarves are gone. But that elf should not have died.
Right.
And there is a reality to that one can't help but think about how poignant that is.
And that's the heart of Tolkien's Legendarium. I mean, he talks about how it's all about fall, the mortality, and the machine. And so often he uses elves to illustrate that. Yeah, he does. And, you really see the tragedy of death because these elves should not die.
You really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it looks really bad. This is, the end is nigh sort of thing. People are making their last stands. One of the problems that Thorin and his dwarves and those who had come to him had done is unfortunately they'd advanced so fast that now his flanks are unguarded. and now all of a sudden they are surrounded. And now the bodyguard of Bolg that they couldn't defeat is now coming against them, and they're on their own now, and all sides are being defeated. So
Yeah.
it's there that I'm going to go ahead and pick up. On all this, Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more chance of escape from that point, and partly, with the more tookish part of his mind, because if he was going to be in a last desperate stand, he preferred on the whole to defend the Elven King. Gandalf, too, I may say, was there, sitting on the ground as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins are in the gate, and we're all slaughtered or driven down and captured. Really, it is enough to make one weep, after all one has gone through. I would rather old Smaug had been left with all the wretched treasure than that these vile creatures should get it. And poor old Balmer and Balin and Fili and Keely and all the rest come to a bad end. And Bard, too, and the Lakemen, and the merry elves. Misery me. I have heard songs of many battles, and I have always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked round. He gave a great cry. He had seen a sight that made his heart leap. Dark shapes, small yet majestic against the distant glow. "The eagles! The eagles!" he shouted. "The eagles are coming!" Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host as must have gathered from all the eyries of the north. "The eagles! The eagles!" Bilbo cried, dancing and waving his arms. If the elves could not see him, they could hear him. Soon they, too, took up the cry, and it echoed across the valley. Many wondering eyes looked up, though as yet nothing could be seen except from the southern shoulders of the mountain. "The eagles!" cried Bilbo once more. But at that moment, a stone hurtling from above smote heavily on his helm, and he fell with a crash and knew no more.
Man.
Ooh. And that's what happens when the Rolling Stones open for the Eagles. I might have to edit that out because it really takes away the poignancy of the moment, but it was funny.
It was funny. Kind of glad you lightened the mood a little bit.
Yeah, really. I mean, this is an amazing moment, but it also is just a very heavy moment, no doubt about that.
It is. It's just brutal.
It is.
And
there's...
I mean, it's all right there in the text. I don't know how much there is there to unpack because it's all just right there.
It really is plain there. There's one thing to unpack. Bilbo doesn't give in to despair. You know, I mean,
that's true.
It's not necessarily that he's hoping for victory until he sees the eagles. He's facing this end, but he's not facing it with despair. You know, he's facing it with sorrow for others. And I love this very kind of understated observation. It's very uncomfortable, not to say
distressing. Seems very uncomfortable and distressing. I wish I was well out of it. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. I mean, that really does kind of understate the whole thing.
I love that moment right before that, just as you were reading it just now, the weight of that line. I have always understood that defeat may be glorious.
Yes. You
know, go back to the quote we talked about at the beginning of the episode and Tolkien's reaction to World War I.
Oh.
And you think about some of the poetry and the literature that came out after World War I.
Yeah.
You know, not just from the Inklings, but, you know, from others. Some of the poets like Wilfred Owen and
Siegfried Sassoon,
and they just, you know, writing about sort of dispelling the myth of the gloriousness of battle and defeat. There's just so much there in that statement of Bilbo's.
It really is.
I know we don't always put Tolkien in the same group as a lot of those post-war poets, but this particular statement
because
really
he maintained,
to echo with that.
I think, a level of hope that they seem to kind of abandon, and there are some significant differences, obviously, in writing style and in ultimate hope that Tolkien has. But you're right. Here, it's very clear.
Here,
defeat isn't glorious.
There's a clear parallel.
Yeah, there really is a parallel. I mean, you can really see Tolkien's experience in World War I showing up here in the realization that, look, I always thought that defeat could be glorious, but now I see it's really, really terrible.
Yeah.
But then we get that moment. Now, I want to point this out because this is where, remember I told you to keep in mind the spears gleaming in the gloom.
Yeah.
Bilbo notices the eagles when, seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked round. It's actually the third time that Tolkien has used this pair of alliterative words, gleam and gloom, during this battle, just in this chapter.
Just in this chapter.
We've got the spears and swords of the elves that we talked about before. They shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame. And then even just when Thorin came out, in the gloom, the great dwarf gleamed like gold, which was a beautiful set of alliteration too. But, within itself. But you've got the gleam and gloom alliteration repeated 3 times. Now, that's pretty significant, let's be clear.
Yeah.
My first thought is that's no accident.
Doesn't do things, doesn't choose words accidentally. No.
Not like that. Certainly not like that. And Corey Olsen, of course, puts it better than we do. So he says this, and it's really it's so well said we wanted to say it. Tolkien was extremely sensitive to the sound and even the etymology of the words he used. I find it hard to believe that such a remarkable repetition would have happened by accident and slipped by him in every revision. Moreover, Tolkien admired alliteration as a poetic device very much, and he often manipulated alliteration, both in his poetry and his prose, to create particular effects. I think it is very likely, therefore, that Tolkien's repetition of this word pair is deliberate, meant to draw a link between these 3 lights in the darkness that offer hope in the battle, culminating in the final eucatastrophe.
Boy, you're not kidding.
I
he
totally
does say
agree.
That better than he absolutely absolutely.
He does say that better than we could. You're right.
he does, but just the contrast of light and dark that gleam and gloom implies.
Gleam and gloom.
Really,
it's another
does
contrast, and it's another alliteration, and it's done 3 times.
And it points to this eucatastrophe.
Yes, it does.
And there's also another bit of symbolism that I picked up on. If you look closely at the words right after Bilbo's thoughts as described by the narrator, it says, "The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west." Now go back to the Dwarven Wind Song. That's the song they sung at Beorn's, where they talked about the wind as symbolic of their own journey.
Yeah, we talked about how it goes into the heavens and all that.
Yeah, right. And we get this reference in the 4th stanza. "The wind went where racing clouds were torn and rent."
Ooh, clouds rent and torn. Okay. I like
now
that.
go to the moment when they're on the doorstep, and the sun's going down, and the sun sank into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. Then suddenly, when their hope was lowest, a red ray of the sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud.
Oh, my.
So we've got these 3 references to the sun shining through a rent, specifically, or in
a clouded sky.
Yeah. And it's just more signs of providence, of prophecy coming true, and of legend.
Of legend, yeah. Oh, man. That is rich. I love that. I love how we're able to find these things because now we're looking for them. I mean, as we're going through this and studying and prepping for these chapters and going through these discussions and thinking what cool things are laying there undiscovered or not undiscovered. It turns out, Corey Olsen
unnoticed
or Douglas
by
Anderson
us,
unnoticed by us previously. And
unnoticed by more casual readers, by people who have not written an entire book on this book.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well worth talking about. And
that's been the thing that I've been most thankful for as we've gone through this is I've never read The Hobbit like this before, and it's so cool to do it.
No, I agree. I mean, first time I read it, I'm a kid, and then later on I'm reading it, I'm reading it through the lens of The Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's almost impossible not to, but I'm not reading it with the kind of care that I would read The Lord of the Rings because I'm thinking of it as this kind of children's book, so to speak, which it is, but it doesn't have to be. It's not only that.
Right.
And so people who kind of
there's more there,
skim over this and aren't paying attention to those richer moments are really missing out. So I'm glad that we've been able to do that. And it's kind of a bummer that we're almost to the end of the book. But
I know. But what a ride it's been.
Oh, boy, you're not kidding. And now we need to talk about that word that we talked about from Corey Olsen's book. Well, it actually goes back further back than that, but we're going to talk about some of Corey Olsen's discussion on it, and that's the eucatastrophe.
Yeah.
We've talked about the concept, of course, a lot on the show, all the way back in episode 1. This is arguably one of the most iconic examples of a eucatastrophe in Tolkien's writing, so we really felt like we needed to talk about it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you've been listening to us from the beginning, which you should. We did read from On Fairy Stories, in which Tolkien laid out the criteria for a fantasy or fairy story. But we want to cover that again here because we think it's important enough that we do that. So one of those requirements that he says is the consolation of the happy ending, or the eucatastrophe.
Yeah, and the word is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll break it down for everyone because it gives me a chance to be a word nerd about Greek, which is one of my favorite.
Your classics education.
Probably my favorite language to be a word nerd about. So the word catastrophe in Greek, it literally just means a downturn or a sudden turn. It was historically used to describe the sudden turn of events at the end of a tragedy, Greek tragedy, that moment when everything comes crashing down. And it's because of that connotation that an otherwise neutral word took on the negative sense that it has now of a catastrophe. But it wasn't always a negative thing.
Right, it was just a sudden turn.
Right, just a sudden turn. Tolkien knew that, of course, and what he's done is he's reclaimed the idea that a sudden turn of events can be a positive thing, and he's given it a new name to focus on that. He's added the Greek prefix "eu," which means good, and so that makes it a good catastrophe, a eucatastrophe, a good turn of events. And so Tolkien is placing his idea of the sudden happy ending of a fairy story in direct contrast to the sudden sad ending of a classical tragedy.
Yeah.
And it becomes for Tolkien as much of a rule for fairy story, which is a word he uses pretty much interchangeably with fantasy. It becomes as much of a rule for fantasy and fairy story as it is a rule that a tragedy has to have a bad catastrophe.
Yeah. Well, and Tolkien even says that it's a rule. I'll read a quote from On Fairy Stories that is one of my favorite quotes from all of Tolkien, frankly. Almost I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it. I will call it eucatastrophe. The eucatastrophic tale is the true form of fairy tale and its highest function. The consolation of fairy stories, the joy of the happy ending, or more correctly of the good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn, for there is no true end to any fairy tale. This joy, which is one of the things which fairy stories can produce supremely well, is not essentially escapist nor fugitive. In its fairy tale or otherworld setting, it is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, and insofar is evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, as poignant as grief. And I want to add evangelium for people who don't recognize that. That same EV, that's the same prefix as you. It's just that it's because it's a
before a vowel
afterwards as opposed to and and that just means good news. Evangelium, it's the same root word for like evangelism or it means good news. It means it's the word that would then be translated as gospel. That became
gospel.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And that joy is really apparent here.
It is.
We see the way that Bilbo's heart leaped.
Oh, yes.
And
he's dancing and waving his arms with a great cry.
Yeah.
And
I mean, talk about joy.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it's never to be counted on. And again, I want to go back to Verlin Flieger's Splintered Light because I was flipping back through that book again recently, and I noticed a quote from her that I think is relevant here. She says, "The ever-present possibility of discatastrophe is what makes the joy at deliverance so piercing."
Right.
And she says later, a couple of pages later, she says, "The outcome of the story must be truly in doubt, always in doubt. Otherwise, there can be no turn." So just as you said, or quoting Tolkien, as Tolkien said, it doesn't deny the existence of discatastrophe. It actually depends on it.
Right.
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
The possibility of that is necessary to the joy of deliverance. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So here we see the eagles show up. It's unexpected. It wasn't a given based on the rules of this world that they would. That's essential or it wouldn't work. And remember, the eagles are the servants of Manwë, and the Valar don't fight the children of Ilúvatar's battles for them.
No.
That's why that age-old question. Yes. We can't just give the one ring to the eagles and let them fly to Mount Doom. We have to fight our own battles.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, we might get a little help.
Yeah, we might. One of the other reasons why we can't do that is we would have just had a powerful Lord of the Eagles become master of Earth.
There's that too.
An invisible eagle. That's helpful.
That's the last thing you need is an eagle dark lord.
He's an eagle evil.
Oh,
You know,
man, that was great. I love that.
a little alliteration.
Yeah.
Even the disc catastrophe is a rule too, really. I mean, as Thorin's death, and sorry, spoiler for next week, shows that sorrow and failure are still present. But I also want to point out how this never to be counted on thing, this really flies in the face of the way the Lake Towners have been believing in prophecies. We've talked about this before. They had this really laissez-faire attitude, this total passivity. That's not the model that Tolkien builds for us in terms of what a eucatastrophe is. Yeah, that's true. They kind of just expect fate's going to take care of everything, and that's really not what Tolkien They almost seem to deny the existence of discatastrophe, and then they count on the sudden miraculous grace.
They count on the eucatastrophe, yeah.
By counting on it, you eliminate its possibilities.
Don't sweat it, guys. The grace is coming. It's all going to be good. So, and there's one more thing that I want to talk about, which Corey Olson points out, and I'm going to read a fairly lengthy quote from him. So bear with me here.
Okay, fine, I will.
Thank you. In the Battle of Five Armies, we see the final enactment of another theme that has recurred several times during this story: the striking tendency of apparent bad luck to turn out to be good luck. The Battle of Five Armies itself is the most extraordinary example of this pattern. A surprise assault by the assembled armies of all the goblins of the Misty Mountains and their warg allies would count as an enormous misfortune for anyone. In this instance, however, we cannot escape the fact that it was also a stroke of almost miraculous good luck. If the goblins had not appeared just when they did, blood would have been spilled between the dwarves of the mountain and the men of Dale. No matter what had happened in that fight, irreparable damage with far-reaching effects would have occurred. In the big picture, the real battle was already won as soon as the elves, dwarves, and men started to fight on the same side, rather than against each other.
Yeah, that is exactly. That is why that's the first eucatastrophe.
That's why that's the first eucatastrophe. The goblins' arrival is sort of the first step of the eucatastrophe, and then the eagles' arrival is a eucatastrophe on top of that.
I mean, like you said, no matter what had happened. I mean, if the goblins had won that fight and every single man, elf, and dwarf there, well, not every single one because somebody would have had to carry the news, but even if they had lost, if it had happened after the bloodshed between men and elves, or men and dwarves, that would have changed the rest of history in the Third Age. To renew the enmity between elves and dwarves and start a new enmity between men and dwarves. Yeah, that's true. Sauron's job's already done for him. Yeah, no kidding. So, yeah. It was an episode or two ago that you said something about everyone's been good at looking out for themselves. Nobody's kind of seeing anybody else's side. And they really needed to get past that. And this eucatastrophe of the goblins, first of all, good point, kind of helps them get past that. It kind of forces them to stick together for once, to fight, together. Absolutely. Now, it may not be as bad as, well, grabbing your friend and shaking him like a rabbit, but, we do know, thanks to modern technology, that some of you tune out for a few minutes after our chapter discussion ends. We're going to ask you, please don't this time. Trust me, we have some good stuff coming in the bag. But before that, we have an announcement to make, and surprise, it is not about Mythmoot. No, it's not. At least it's not primarily about Mythmoot. Okay. As you all can tell, we're getting close to the end of The Hobbit, so we want to talk to you all about what to expect after we finish it. So please, do stick around. You really do want to hear this. Yeah, you really do. We've got 2 more chapters of The Hobbit to get through, which will take us through episode 86, 2 weeks from today. After that, we'll do a retrospective in episode 87, a look back at some of the major themes and our favorite moments from the book. And, of course, some of your questions about The Hobbit that we haven't gotten a chance to answer yet. And if we get through all of those, well, who knows? Maybe there are still a few Silmarillion questions rattling around in the bag. There are always a few Silmarillion questions rattling around in the bag. Yeah, I can guarantee there are a few. Yeah. And then a week after that is when we'll be at Mythmoot 5, which we'll be recording and releasing on the podcast feed as episode 88. And following that, we'll be releasing our next Questions After Nightfall episode, where we'll be joined by several of our listeners for a live recorded Q&A. A lot of fun. And maybe there will be one other little surprise after that. Maybe. But then... Well, first off, let's be clear, we're not going anywhere. I want to make sure we settle that argument. Yes. We've got a plan for the next several years, beginning with The Lord of the Rings, and we are really excited. But it's going to be a big job, and we want to do it right. The truth is our weekly schedule just has not left us a lot of time for planning out our approach to that incredibly daunting project. Nor has it given us the time to work on a few other things that we'd like to get in place for Season 3, or, frankly, any time to rest in between. No. I'm sure there's an appropriate Bilbo Baggins quote for the way we feel, but I just can't quite think of it. All thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean. like butter that has been scraped over too much bread.
That's the one.
That is
And
the
while
one.
we are happy to do it, no, scratch that. We love doing it.
We do.
We want to make
We
sure
really
that we continue to give you the best Tolkien podcast around. Or at least the one with the most Monty Python and Hitchhiker's Guide and Homestar Runner jokes.
And Princess Bride quotes.
And Princess Bride quotes.
Yeah. So after Mythmoot and after we release a couple of other things that we have in the works, we'll be taking a brief hiatus during the summer. Now, it's not going to be too long, just a few weeks. We plan to be back to start Season 3 sometime in mid-August. After all, it's the job that's never started as takes longest to finish, as my old gaffer used to say.
But don't worry. While we're off, we will still be around on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Barliman will still be bringing us the mail. And most importantly, we will still be working on several things related to the podcast. All of it is with an eye towards making things even better in Season 3.
That's right. And in fact, we're planning on doing the same thing between each season going forward, just as a heads up. Not only will that keep us fresh and entertaining, well, as entertaining as we can be, it'll give us a chance. Yeah, exactly. Very low bar. It'll give us a chance to prepare for each upcoming season more thoroughly. That's something that we've really learned a lesson on, and we want to kind of build that time in so that our episodes are even more interesting for you. So there you have it. If you have any questions, just let us know on social media or by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you'd like to tell us in person how much you're going to miss the podcast, you can still come see us at Mythmoot. See, I told you it wasn't primarily about Mythmoot.
I see what you did there. That's taking place June 21st to 24th at the beautiful National Conference Center in Leesburg, Virginia.
And we'll be airing that live on Facebook at the time of the event, Saturday, June 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. But we'll also put it up on the podcast feed, as Alan said, as episode 88.
That is correct. Now, the deadline is getting close. It's May 31st. But if you're listening to this episode the day it releases, there is still time to register. And come see us live by visiting tinyurl.com/mythmootv. So, like I said, deadline's May 31st. Do that now if you haven't already.
And then you can say, I saw the Prancing Pony podcast stream live from a combination literary conference and fan convention sponsored by Signum University. And they interviewed folks like John Garth, Corey Olson, Doug Anderson, and Mark Ockrand.
Or you can say you hung out with the host of the Prancing Pony podcast at an exclusive listener gathering the Thursday night of Mythmoot. Yeah. Now, as for the episode, we'll be airing that live on Facebook at the time of the event, like Sean said. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be putting that up as a regular episode.
And while we're not going to ask you for anything, if you'd like to see how we're doing towards our Patreon goals, you can see those at patreon.com/prancingponypod.
That's right.
Of course, we want to give a very special shout out to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. That's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Don in Vancouver Island, and Emily in Texas. Thank you all.
Indeed. Well, Sean, why don't we go ahead and get on with a short section in Barliman's Bag?
Yeah, we'll make it short, but before we begin, I really do want to apologize to Maylene in Long Beach, California. She asked a question about the Doors of Durin in episode 81, and I said she was from Chicago?
I don't know where you got that from.
I figured it out. I'm really sorry, Maylene. That was a clerical error on Barliman's part.
Well, of course.
And we have sent a wizard to turn all his ale sour as punishment. So,
only for a few months, I hope.
Yeah.
Well, our question tonight is a priority delivery, thanks Barliman, from Lee in Oregon, one of our patrons at the Elrond's honorarium level. Is there a connection, he asks, between the specific detail of black sword and black arrow as dragon-slaying weapons in other mythologies? If not, what would you say is the significance of these items named as black, the black sword or black arrow, for Tolkien? They seem to be the only times in the legendarium that something black at all, let alone capitalized black, are given this positive connotation. He goes on to say that he's done some preliminary research into black weapons which slay dragons in mythology. I don't find many. Lee goes on to mention a few examples of some interesting weapons he found, like soul-stealing weapons or weapons forged from meteoric metals, sentient weapons, so some things that kind of hint at Gurthang, for instance, but nothing that quite fits the bill. Now, Sean, you agreed to take the lead on this one, so what did you find for us?
Well, not much, honestly, Lee.
Okay, well, I guess we're done. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Good night, folks. No, to start, I'm not aware of any occurrence of black dragon-slaying weapons in other mythologies that I know of from my own reading. And both Douglas Anderson and John Ratliff have nothing on it. And given how good they are at usually, finding these connections to other sources, I assume that their silence means that there isn't any connection to a mythology that's
probably a good
that's
assumption.
There. back in episode 81, we did talk about some of the sources that the Black Arrow was influenced by. We talked about Beleg's arrow Dailir and the old Entish sword of Beowulf being, something that just sort of shows up and then is gone. And I think when we did that, I think we managed to dig up all that there was to find on the Black Arrow sources then. So I think that really is it. And even if we look within the Legendarium, I can't think of any direct connection between those two weapons, sort of in universe, because we know the Black Arrow was made in the Third Age by dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, whereas Turin's black sword Gorthang, which was originally Anglikel, was made in the First Age by Eöl, who was an elf. He's friends with the dwarves, but that was long before the Kingdom Under the Mountain was founded. And we also know that Gorthang's black color came from the meteoric ore that it was made from, and I have no reason to believe that anybody but Eöl ever had that material to work with. So
no, I mean, the text tells us that he made 2 swords from that material, and that's it.
Right, that's right, yeah. So I don't really think that there is a connection that we can find, unfortunately. Now, Lee, in response to your other question as to what the significance is of the weapons being black, I'm kind of landing at this being another case where Tolkien was inspired by himself. Remember that quote from Ratliff that I love where he draws on his rich homebrew mythology?
You and your homebrew.
My rich homebrew. Similar to the way the Arkenstone is inspired by the Silmarils. We talked about that. It's inspired by without actually being a Silmaril or connected to them in any way. I think Tolkien probably just liked the idea of a black weapon killing a dragon, and he liked it so much that he decided to use it here. And let's face it, he never had any notion that Turin and Glaurung's story would ever actually see print. So
that's a good point.
Why not put it here? I don't know. Alan, any additional thoughts?
Not much. I mean, I agree. I land where you landed. I've looked in Ratliff and Anderson. I've also looked in Hammond and Skull. I scoured the dark corners of the Tolkien interwebs, and really there just doesn't seem to be any clear connection.
Some scary stuff out there.
There's some really scary stuff, dude. There really just doesn't seem to be any connection between the two. And this was the part that I thought for sure we could find something, there didn't seem to be any connection to a real world mythology. Now, I could, of course, be wrong. It's happened many, 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 many times. I don't want to count how many times. So if anybody listening can think of anything, please feel free to let us know. But otherwise, Lee, I'm with Sean on this one. Beyond the fact that black is just a cool color to have a dragon-slaying weapon in, I just don't think there's any greater significance. So I think we're done on that one.
I think so.
All right. Well, thanks, Lee. And folks, that nearly wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again next time when we get to Chapter 18 of The Hobbit.
Even Bilbo isn't sure what to expect when he wakes up. Maybe the whole adventure was all just a dream.
Well, in the meantime, probably not, yeah. We invite you to please, when you're not dreaming, check out the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. We have links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks, perfect for taking notes in. Get your Lord of the Rings paperbacks now, by the way.
That's right.
Get those ready.
You'll want to take notes in those.
Yes, you will. You're going to fill up those margins. It's just some really good stuff for your Tolkien collection.
And if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd be very grateful for that. Those reviews help us get more visibility in iTunes, and that translates to a bigger community of Tolkien lovers.
Yes, it does. And thank you to those of you who have, by the way. We do still read every one of them, like we say every week, but we really do it. And we're also featuring one a week on our social media networks on Thankful Thursdays. Make sure you never miss an episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast by subscribing to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And thank you to all of those of you who have become part of our social media family. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone could join, and that's why we have the online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and videos of your pets reenacting the Battle of Five Armies to Bar. Well,
no bats, please.
We know the cats are going to be on the bad side, right? I just want to make sure we get that clear.
Hey, come on.
It's a Tolkien battle. Don't
Fauna of Mordor, indeed.
Fauna of Mordor. So
just no bats.
That's right. There you go. Cats and bats together again. Send those videos to Bartleman at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Like Thurin, Gwethel, and Tevildo. I'm sorry. You go ahead and finish. I will let you do your outro, sir.
That's okay. No, just so if you actually do take the time to stage a recreation of the Battle of Five Armies with your pets, now I'm not sure, the dogs will clearly be on the good side. Send that video to Bartleman at the prancingponypodcast.com, which of course we'll never get one now. We'll try to get him into our next episode. Well, no matter how long we've had, no matter how many digressions we've had, the time is still far too short to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.